want to catch the biggest bass in your lake this summer, then you are going to want to pay attention to today's video because I'm going to show you how to target the biggest bass in your lake all summer long. To do so, I'm going to show you how to rig my favorite technique to target these bigger bass, where you want to be fishing this bait to make sure it's around the bigger bass, and how to fish this bait, along with one of my favorite bonus tips to catch even more fish. So stay tuned and let's get right into it. Okay, so what is this technique that's going to catch you bigger bass this summer? This is actually going to be an iteration of a Texas rig. This is one that I started using up here in the Northeast, and I'm sure it'll catch fish other places as well. What we're going to be fishing today is mostly submergent grass, and grass edges at that. So we're going to be out in like 8, 10, 12 feet of water, but we're going to be getting reaction bites with this. So we're not actually physically punching like canopies or mats or anything like that, but essentially this is a punch rig. So what I do, first off, you got to have a right rod for this. I have done it before with a 7'3" heavy action, just a jig rod, but more importantly, you're going to need braided lines. So I put 65-pound test braid on here. This grass is going to be thick. These fish are going to be down deep in it. You're going to need that line to slice through that grass to get those fish out and into the boat. I have a Corrado MGL on here. This is the 7:1 gear ratio. I want a very fast gear ratio on this bait. I want to be able to pitch it, work the bait, reel it right back in, pitch again. I'm going to cover a ton of water with this thing. I'm going to try and get reaction bites. And then lastly, I'm using the Cashin Icon flipping rod on here. Like I said, you can use the 7'3" medium heavy, but this thing has been awesome. It helps when you're flipping all day. These heavy flipping rods want to nose down, but this has a counterweight in the butt here, so it'll actually try to keep the tip up a little bit, and it makes it a lot easier to flip all day long, and it has the backbone to set the hook and get those fish in the boat. Now, when you get down to your rig down here, the way that I like to rig mine up, I put 2 bobber stops on because I'm using a very heavy tungsten, so it'll keep that bait in place. I don't want my weight to separate from my bait at all. You want this thing to stay compact going down through the grass, because if you have it separate, this can fall down through the grass and your bait can get stuck up in the canopy somewhere and never get down to where those fish actually live. So I put both these bobber stops on and I'll peg my weight up against the edge there. Now, this weight is a 3/4 ounce. I'm gonna go anywhere from a 1/2 ounce up to probably like 1 1/4 ounces. It really depends on the depth of the water, how thick the weeds are, how aggressive the fish are. My most used size is a 3/4 or a 1 ounce, and you're probably thinking that's really heavy to be flipping a Texas rig in grass that's not really matted up. The reason for that is I want this bait to fall very quickly through the water. I want it to get right down to the fish. More often than not, they're gonna be sitting there waiting to ambush prey, and if this falls down in front of them, they'll just grab it. If you're using something very light, one, it's gonna take you forever to fish. You're gonna have to fish much slower and less efficient and not cover as much water. And 2, you might not get that reaction bite, so it'll slowly fall down there. There are days for that, but if you're gonna target big fish, this is the way I like to do it. You might not catch the most amount of fish in a day doing this, but more likely than not, when you set the hook, it's going to be a good one. Since it's going to be a good one, I put a very heavy hook on here. This is a 4/0 ox flipping hook. I like it because it has the keeper, so I can keep my bait together and it'll fall through the cover easy and I don't have to keep fixing my bait. And it is super heavy wire, so I'm not bending a hook out on these fish. I can stick them, reel them up. You could boat flip a 6-pounder on this setup right here and nothing would go wrong. And then lastly, some type of a beaver bait. I'm using the 6 cents prawn here. We'll put that up on there. I'll show you in a minute how to actually rig this up on these hooks when we get to fishing up here, but that's the bait that I'm gonna be using. Any type of like bluegillish color will work just fine. This is dark melon red. Any type of a green pumpkin, watermelon red type color, or even black and blue will work excellent on these fish. If you want to check out any of this gear, I will have it all linked down in the description below, and you can use my code Quince on 6 Cents website and you'll save 10% off your order. It helps me out a ton. But that is the rig. That's all you really need. Now let's get up there. The more important part is making sure you're putting this in the right spot and fishing it the right way to catch these big fish. So let's get out there and catch us a couple. So now that we talked about how to rig up this bait, let's talk about where to fish this bait so we can catch us some big bass. Today is not the most ideal day for this technique, but we're gonna try our best and hopefully catch us some fish. You can see we have some overcast, windy conditions. This technique actually excels the calmer and sunnier it is, the hotter it can be in the summertime. When you're standing out there and you're like, I can't stand to be out here another minute, you're dripping sweat, that's when this technique is really gonna shine. because these fish are going to get in the grass. So what we're actually looking at here on my graph, we're looking for big clumps of grass. We're either going to look for big clumps of it, or most likely up here in the north, it'll grow all around the lake. So we'll get out to the edge of it, that deep grass edge, but it still grows up to the surface or just below it, and it's very thick. And that's why we talked about using that heavier weight on there so you can actually get that bait through there. One of the tips that I'm actually going to pitch to you guys here today is looking for these fish on rock piles within the grass. So we'll show you what some of those look like as we approach some of these spots. But what these fish will do is on those hot sunny days, they will get down on hard bottom areas that are within the grass. So whether you graph the lake before the grass comes up and you can find where those rock piles are, or what I like to do, even if you don't have high-end electronics, you can get out on the grass edge here, and when you're flipping, just mark every time you catch a fish. So what'll happen is you'll start to build a pattern of where you're catching fish, and you'll see every time you catch one, you catch 3 or 4 in one little area, and then you'll go a little bit further and you'll catch 3 or 4 in one little area. Those are those hard bottom areas. You just might not be able to see them on your fish finders. Now let's get to fishing this bait and see if we can catch us a couple. So I have my 6 cents prawn right here, and I have my flipping hook. So what I like to do, I stab it right down the middle and I go to the bend of the hook. Then I'll pop it out centered in the belly there, and I'll push it up to this keeper. And before I flip it over, I've talked about this on some of these other bait keeper hooks before. If you push it over upside down over this keeper, it'll actually rip a channel in the top of the head there, but then you can flip it around and that keeper will sit right up against that bait and you won't pull it off as easy. So it comes through the grass a lot easier. You can make a ton of flips without getting hung up and be able to fish more efficiently. And then I'll just line up my hook where it needs to go in. I'll poke it in there and I'll pull it just below the skin where I'm not gonna get hung up. Maybe once or twice, I'll kind of tuck it in there. I want that thing buried in there so that this thing is not getting hung up as I'm pitching it through the grass and I can flip it through effectively. You can see this tungsten's taken a beating over the past couple weeks catching some of these fish, but I'll slide that down to the bait and then I will slide both of my bobber stops right up against that as well. So now I have a whole compact profile that's gonna go down through the weeds and not get hung up. I'll pinch apart my tails and now we're ready to fish. This is the repetitive part, but you're literally just going to flip this thing out there repeatedly. And it is a search bait, even though it's a Texas rig, you're gonna be searching for these fish with this, and that's why you can cover some water. That's why you have that super heavy weight on there. I can cover a lot of water quickly with this bait. I can flip, 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 and work my way around and catch fish or not catch fish and then move on. You'll see I'll work this bait very quickly as we're doing this, and that's why I have that high speed gear ratio. You can see I'm just fan casting my way around the area and will work my way through until I catch fish. The actual retrieve of this technique, which we'll show you right here, I will pitch this thing out here anywhere. I mean, if the grass is right there, you can pitch right there. So you can pitch anywhere from 10 to maybe 30 feet away from the boat. I'm not gonna make long bomb casts with this thing. I will literally be pitching it like I'm pitching at a lay down on the bank. And what I'll do is, whether I can physically see the grass topped out at the surface, like there's a stalk right there, I could pitch it to that stalk and let it fall down right next to that stem of grass and there could be a fish at the base of it. Or I'll see it on my fish finder here, and we'll show you that throughout the day of where like that grass might top out and you're riding the edge. I'll go ahead and just throw it 20 feet over there and let it sink down to the bottom. You want it going completely slack line when you pitch this. So a lot of times you'll be fishing in 8 to 10 foot of water. I'll flip this out there and then I'll let some line out and free spool it, and then that way it can sink on slack line. I'll let that thing bomb down to the bottom. Sometimes you'll get the reaction bite as soon as it hits the ground. If not, I'll lift up, I'll give it a hop or two, and if I don't have anything, I'm reeling it right back in and pitching again. This is gonna be pure reaction. It's gonna fall down in there and they're just gonna grab it out of reaction when it hits them in the head. So I don't spend much time working the bait through the cover or anything like that. We just hop it along and catch us some fish. I got that one. That's a good one. It's a tubby fish. That's the kind of fish you usually catch with this technique. If you're gonna set the hook, it's gonna look like this. Granted, you can make a lot of flips and you can catch minimal fish some days, but a lot of times when you do set the hook, that's the kind of fish you're gonna set the hook on. And that is a beauty right there. Not a giant one. I think we could maybe even catch some bigger than that. This was on a rock pile. You can actually see, that's the rock pile right there. I literally flipped these rings. I got them at 22.5 feet. So that's literally 20 feet away from the boat. I flipped right on that rock pile. As soon as it hit the bottom, he ate it. It was a straight reaction bite, but that's one of the bonus areas that you can find these fish when you're flipping around. But if you can find a sweet spot like that, more likely than not, that's where you're gonna catch multiple, or one or two or whatever. That one's just a little guy. But that was literally the next cast. Pay attention to that stuff while you're fishing around. Like I said, if you don't have high-end electronics, that's fine. I would have just dropped 2 waypoints right there and a waypoint on the other one, which is literally like 5 feet away from here. So I'd start to see over time, I flip this whole grass edge, all my fish come from right here. Why would they come from right there? Most likely there's something hard bottom down there. Oh my gosh, this is insane. That might be a big one. It is. Ooh, that's a good one there. This is exciting. It's been a long day, but we're starting to figure them out. That's another good one. Still would like to see something in the 3 to 4 pound range, but that's still a good one. See you, buddy. Got that one. That's a good one. Come here, buddy. Look at that one. And while the Texas rig is not only a great way to catch a bunch of bass like we did today, it's also great for catching big fish. However, there used to be a bunch of mistakes that I used to make when fishing a Texas rig. So if you want to see what those were, go ahead and check this video out right here. Hit the subscribe button down below if you enjoyed it. And thanks for watching. See you on the next one.